time. So if you're heading to a different class, the Lord bless and keep you on your way. If you're in this class, have a seat. Let's get strapped in. Let's start. Oh, man. Hello. Are you going to be here? Outstanding. All right. Well, we are on week 4 of 6. It's nearly there. We're almost done. I'm going to be kind of sad to see this series go. Maybe I'll have to find excuses to sort of launch off of various points and start off branches that keep us there. Because I know for myself it's really been enriching me just to prepare in order to speak these things to you. And I think if we can wrap our heads around this, and more importantly, if we can wrap our hearts around these concepts, I think our church is going to be all the better for it. Because we're exploring what makes the Book of Acts church so unique. And it's attitudinal issues, it's spiritual issues that make them unique. And if we want to see the same kind of fruit in the ministry that we have here, we've got to adopt the same kind of heart that they had. And they were in close proximity. I mean, they knew Jesus. They actually walked with him in his human form. And that's a privilege we may not have, but we have Jesus resident within us. And there's such an intimacy to that there is an achievable relationship that we can have with God that can inspire us to behave similarly to them. So we're going to get into some scriptures here today as we study this idea of living generously. That's what week 4 is about, learning to live generously. And this idea of generosity is kind of a big concept, right? Let me ask a question of all of you before I read the opening scriptures. How many of you would say, of all the things that you're generous with, your money is probably the thing that you are most generous with? If you know that there's a financial need, it's pretty easy for you to try and scrape something aside and make sure that you give towards it. How many of you feel money generosity is probably the thing that's easiest for me? Show me by raising your hands. Awesome, I know who I'm borrowing from. And then, no, I'm kidding. And then what about if I said, how many of you find that actually it's not necessarily money because maybe your budget's kind of tight, but you say to yourself, time is the thing that I can give. So if people need my time, that's the thing that I can be most generous with. How many by a show of hands? Okay, awesome. Great. We're going to be getting into both of these things, but really we're focusing on time. And for those of you who find money to be the easier thing, I totally get that. And this is not a railing against that in any kind of way. It's more bringing out time management a little bit more and how it relates to the church. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 12 to 16. No doubt you've read this. And it's a bit of beautiful pastoral counsel. And the Apostle Paul is taking a moment to challenge his protege and give him some principles, some guiding principles to examine his life through. And here's what he says, 1 Timothy 4, verses 12 to 16. Let no one despise your youth, but be an example to the believers in word, in conduct, in love, in spirit, in faith, in purity, till I come. Give attention to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. Do not neglect the gift that is in you, which was given to you by prophecy with the laying on of the hands of the eldership. Meditate on these things. Give yourself entirely to them, that your progress may be evident to all. Take heed to yourself and to the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this you will save both yourself and those who hear you. Well, what in the world does this have to do with our topic? I'll tell you what it has to do. There's a spot there where he says, and I want to make sure we got this in context, but he says, take heed to yourself. Depending on the translation of the Bible that you have, it also is rendered, watch your life. Watch your life and your doctrine. In other words, when you're really taking a look at your entire life, end to end, how you're behaving, what you think, how you feel about different kinds of subjects, and where your mind kind of sits, where your attitude tends to sit, the kind of actions and behaviors and habits you find yourself giving your attention to and your life force, if you will, to. He says, watch that life, watch that doctrine. Make sure that you are doing a deep examination of who you are, what is making you tick, and how you're spending your time. Because he goes on to say, continue in that. Make sure that you continually are doing the self-examination, because there's actually fruit from this, and it's not just for you. He says, continue in them, for in doing this, you will save both yourself and those who hear you. In other words, there is no person in this room that has the right to a solo life. What do I mean by this? If you're going to be in the family of God, you have an immediate effect on everything around you. So there's no decision that you make that's 100% for yourself. Because in some form or fashion, it's going to have a splash effect on someone else. And you say to yourself, well, how does it have a splash effect? I mean, so what? I get up in the morning and I go to work. What does that have to do with anybody in this room? They're not with me. Okay, but when you go to work, you're setting an example of what Mountain View is to those employees. And when you go to work, if you are a good worker, you're building up a rapport with other people in the community that has a direct effect on the image of this church. And when you go to work, if you do well and you excel, that money that you make ends up being a blessing, because when you're giving faithfully, you're affecting the church. No matter what, there are no real private decisions in the life of a Christian. Everything touches everything, because we are a body that's fitly framed together. So Paul looks at Timothy basically in this letter and says, I need you to pay attention to every facet of your existence. I need you to examine it. I need you to take care, not for just how you live, but what you think about how you live, your doctrine. Why do you choose what you choose? Why do you choose to see God in the way that you see him? Why do you choose to see your brother or your sister in the way that you choose to see them? Pay attention, because everything you wrap your arms around is going to have an effect not only on yourself but others. And he actually says in doing so, you can literally save other people by guarding your own life. I think if we look at ourselves through the lens of generosity, as we did starting this, and we are talking about living generously today, I think some of us clearly find certain aspects of generosity easier than others. And I get it. We have agendas. We have goals. Anybody in this room completely goalless, like I have nothing? There's nothing I aspire to. There's nothing I ever want to do. All right, I think every one of us is like, there's a few things I'd like to do. And maybe you're not necessarily in a station of life where there's certain things that you need. Like you might not all be aspiring to buy a house or get a new car. But there might be some little trip you want to take. Or maybe it's just a matter of, I'd like to make it to Christmas and be able to get some things for the people I love. Like it can be small things that you're just saying, that's a goal of mine. Maybe the goal is just, there's this really nasty closet in my house, and eventually I want to clean it. Okay, and we have a testimony over there in the fourth row. But you know, I think all of us have these little goalposts in our life where we're saying, these are things that I want to see happen. These are things I want to plan towards. So we have agendas, we have goals, we have priorities, we have errands that we need to run. We have a lot of responsibilities, and you know what we don't like? Interruptions. Anybody in this room is like, I absolutely love interruptions. I love when I'm concentrating really well on something and enter a person chattering at me, totally disturbing my flow, right? It's hard. I will tell you, I've noticed something about myself as I'm aging. I've noticed that my tolerance for multitasking is dropping. And I never thought that would happen, because I was like multitask queen at one point in my life. I am dethroned, okay? Like, I am totally dethroned. Now I need, and I don't know if anybody else can relate to this, but you know how there are some people who can forget doing a bunch of tasks at once. You know those people who can drop one task and immediately start another one? I've noticed that I need to like file for divorce from the previous task, mourn a period, and then find my next relationship with a task, okay? Like I'm that person who needs space in between. I can't just go bing, 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 bing anymore, because it starts wearing me down. And I find that my patience starts wearing and I feel rushed. And as I'm getting older, I don't like the feeling of being rushed. And the hard thing about interruptions is that interruptions create rush. And the reason why interruptions create rush is you were concentrated, you were focused, you were walking in a course, an interruption comes, you have to sidestep, you have to deal with that, and now you feel like you have less time for the original thing that you were supposed to be getting done. It's hard for us because our time is linear. It starts at point A, it goes to B, C. This is our day. There's 24 hours in it. You got a lot of pretty good amount to sleep, hopefully. I am not doing that lately. But you're supposed to. And so that starts limiting things. And when you have a job, that limits it even further. And then you come home, you want to have a family life. You want to be able to socialize, whatever it is you want to do. You want to give some time to your hobbies, to your pet, I don't know. Whatever those things are. You want to be able to give those times to it. But you find that everything is shrinking because there are things that take it. And then an interruption makes it even worse. The reason why I'm harping on interruptions is because today I kind of want to talk about how we as a church have to have an interruptible spirit. Let me explain what I mean by this. To put yourself in community, to put yourself in real relationships with the people around you in this room means to welcome their interruptions. Because you're going to be needed at various points. And it's not always going to be convenient or conducive to your schedule. And being able to move with interruptions is a form of generosity. It's generosity of time. It's generosity of spirit. It's generosity in the form of compassion. So let's delve into a few things here. Let's go to Matthew chapter 14. Let's live there for a little bit. Now, if you're a note taker, I would take down the note of Matthew 14, verses 1 to 21, so you can see the full context of it. I'm not going to read all those verses. I'm going to jump in towards the latter half of the story, and I'll explain why we're choosing this one. So I'm going to start at about verse 9, personally. Matthew 14, starting in verse 9. So to just lay the context here, we all know good old John the Baptist, Mr. Wild Man, Mr. No Filter. Okay, he had absolutely no filter. Can I just tell you something? In your ministry, you can be that person with no filter. It does not guarantee you long life, okay? but it's an approach, all right? So good old John the Baptist had absolutely no filter. He shot to kill, and in this particular case, he absolutely shot to kill, and somebody decided that they really hated the way that he spoke, so they created and conspired a bit of a situation to do a nice little dance with 7 veils that one at a time came off, oh my. And by the time it was all said and done, we've got a really impressed dude who's like, love it, loved every minute of it, we'll give you anything that you want. Awesome, John the Baptist's head, please. And so we pick it up in verse 9, and here's what it says. The king was sorry. Nevertheless, because of the oaths, and because of those who sat with him, he commanded it to be given her. So he sent and had John beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl. And she brought it to her mother. Then his disciples came and took the body and buried it and went and told Jesus. Now you have to understand, this is not just a ministry peer to Jesus. This is his cousin. This is blood. And this blood relative is someone no doubt he loved. Now, I know it's hard to imagine divinity and humanity, right? And how those two things merge the way that they do in Jesus. But I don't want to disregard his humanity either. That he is still 100% man. He still has 100% emotion, and while he is the epitome of holiness, it doesn't mean he doesn't feel. And this is a blood relative. This is someone he grew up with, and this is someone he did, in a sense, ministry with. This is his forerunner. This is the cousin who was supposed to go on ahead of him and declare the king is coming, essentially. This is the guy who tells the crowd, I'm not even worthy to unbuckle my cousin's shoes. He's so much greater than I. This is a God that he has known for at least 30 years. And now he's been brutally killed. And his body's been buried, and Jesus is not there to observe any kind of formal funeral, which brings a lot of closure. That moment you can say goodbye, it's been ripped away from him. It's been ripped away from everybody. John is important in this story. He has disciples of his own. He has followers. He has people who were affected, both negative and positive, by his ministry. And he's snuffed out young. We always think the tragedy is the death of Jesus, but actually, John's death is a tragedy as well. A terrible one. And once again, he had his approach in ministry. And in a sense made his bed, and he wasn't guaranteed any kind of long life. And he had one of those ministries that was just as wild as him in the wilderness. Okay? He spoke, he shot straight. He paid for it. But we don't want to dismiss the fact that nobody who loved him had any measure of closure. Now, if you've had anybody in your life pass away, somebody who was quite close, somebody who was meaningful to you, you probably need a little time to grapple with that and everything that is. Because a part of you's been ripped away. And in that part of you being ripped away, there's a vacancy. There's an ache. There's a pain. And you got to work through that grief, right? I think everyone in this room has probably worked through some grief in their life where, wow, you were really surprised. Something that you thought you could kind of guarantee was going to be there, that face that was still going to be smiling at you, that voice was still going to be heard, and now it's gone. The reason why I'm nailing this home is because of what happens next in the story. So when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. Well, of course he did. That was his cousin. That was his kin. That was his friend. And he needs time alone, away from the demands of everyone and everything. But look at what happens. But when the multitudes heard it, they followed him on foot from the cities. So just the time when you don't want people, there they are. I mean, really. Have we really looked at this story in light of what's happening here? He just wants to be by himself, but everybody else has also heard about his grief and has heard about the loss of John. Now, what has happened here really? A leader has been lost. Jesus is not the only leader. He's not the only preacher of this message. He and John are doing this in tandem. And so both are accruing followers. And here's the thing. Part of what John is doing is John, by unfortunately landing in prison, John's followers are very likely now chasing after Jesus because we still need a voice, right? And so if John's been pointing to him saying, he's the one, go follow him, he's the one. So all these people are now in mourning themselves. They're all feeling something too, and the first thing they want is to be around him. Okay. So what happens? I'll tell you what happens next. You can read it on the screen behind me. Verse 14, and when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and what happens? He was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him saying, this is a deserted place, the hour is already late, send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food. Just get them out of here for a while. Can we clear our heads? We've been doing this all day. I mean, they must have known that the intention of Jesus was to go off quietly for a while and mourn and consider. But instead, all these people are rounding around them, and he's moved with what? Compassion. He's looking out at them, and something is kind of turning within his chest, and he feels compelled that he has to take care of them in that moment. And his disciples are now at the point of being exasperated. Just get him out. This is a nice, quiet, and deserted place. Can we just sit here a while? They're all affected by this as well. Just send them and let them go get food or something. It's been a long day. They must be hungry. It's a perfect excuse to get them lost, right? But Jesus said to them, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. They said to him, we have only 5 loaves and 2 fish, which, by the way, wouldn't have been enough even for their little party. He said, "Bring them here to me." Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass. He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate. They were all filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. We always talk about the feeding of the 5,000, which was actually more, because we're not including the women and children. Let's say it was half and half. We're looking at potentially, 10,000? And maybe if we take some Jewish culture and chop the amount of women who might have been present down, 7,500, I don't know. But we're talking huge amounts of people. You and I would not necessarily, short of a miracle too, be able to fill that many bellies. And we talk about that miracle, but we don't talk about the stage that was set before it. That you have a man who is in mourning, who wants to be alone, but is still moved because there's a need in front of him. You know, if you've ever been a Star Trek fan, you might know where I'm going here, but sometimes the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few and even the needs of the one. Right? Something good old Spock said. Such wisdom in Spock. But it's true. Sometimes the needs of the people in front of you have got to outweigh your personal needs. If we're going to do church right, it can't always be about you and I. Let me tell you, I know what it's like to live a life where you're filling a lot of different needs and you're watching yourself chip away. And there's balance that needs to be attained too. But you know why a lot of people in churches, especially in ministry and leadership, burn out? It's because no one else is being generous with their time. And that's just a fact. Sometimes the reason why your leaders are exhausted by ministry is because they're doing a lot of the carrying by themselves because everybody else has an agenda and nobody likes interruptions. And sometimes you just want to go, and I understand what it is. Sometimes I just want to go. Sometimes I just want to go home and deflate and sort of melt into 1,000 pieces and no longer exist for a while. I get it. I totally appreciate that feeling. I've been feeling it a lot lately. But can I tell you, sometimes Josie is still going to have to pull Josie up by her bootstraps and say, "Kid, it's time to move forward because there's work to be done. And there's people who need you. And it can't just be, God will take care of you, Josie. But sometimes the task at hand is what's important. And you trust God for the remainder of what's left of yourself at times. He's faithful and he's just. But what we can't do is we can't think that balance is always saying no. That balance is always ignoring. No, that's actually not how it works. And in fact, when we do that, there are going to be points where we really miss the deep and desperate needs of another person that can't be fulfilled by them alone. Here's a truth. Jesus saw their humanity. He saw their physical need. He saw their soul in need of a Savior and a leader in the midst of loss that they shared together. He cared for them. He cared for them enough to suspend his mourning and pour himself into ministry. It's an act of love and it's an act of sacrifice. There's no doubt. Jesus is a physical being. We don't want to forget that. And I know it's easy to forget that because he's divine, because he's God wrapped in flesh. But he's still God wrapped in flesh. Flesh that hurts, flesh that needs, flesh that requires sleep, a human nature that still needs a break for a rest of mind and body. It's still a body that occasionally is going to get hungry, a body that might be irritated by environmental factors, a body that can be broken down by things. It's still a body. He still needs things. He didn't just float around on a cloud above all the basic human needs. No, he had it all. Everything. Thank God. It says in the scripture, we have a high priest who has been tempted in every way that we have. He understands the feelings, it says in the scripture, of our infirmities. Those things that make us say, ouch. He understands the nature of how that feels. But still, in a moment of crisis, when he's looking out at starving people who have foregone their ability to take a break because his words were so valuable. Understand, he's also recognizing that those people sat there looking to him and wanting to be spiritually fed. They wanted his presence. They wanted his time. And they also put on hold their daily lives to be committed to that moment. So he's also seeing the dedication of those people, and he's saying that is worth blessing. They are here for me because they got the same news as me, and they don't want to leave me alone. I can't abandon them either. Do you see how that works? And that's what starts happening in the church. We start to get to know each other to the point where we understand what makes one another tick and what those needs are. And we don't abandon each other in those moments. Even when, hey, there are some times, I get it, when we need space. But can I tell you something? Sometimes the space that we need is not actually the space that we need. We don't know where else to go except to be by ourselves because we don't know how to share it with another person. There is something really holy about sharing with another person when your natural desire is to pull away. There is something about pushing past that and not letting yourself be the lone ranger, the lone wolf, because there is no glory in being the lone wolf. There's no glory in being strong by yourself. If you spend a lot of time constantly saying, no, it's me, and I will be in fellowship when it is convenient to me. No, that's not how the church works. That's not what Jesus is building, because he knows we are meant for community. We have got to support each other. We are better together. Generosity in time is inconvenient. There is no doubt about it. But that doesn't mean that we don't need it. Here's another truth. We need to be honest about our stinginess with our time. We do. We need to be honest about it. I'm going to take us to another scripture. Let's go to Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2. Because it's only fitting when we're doing a study about Acts that we occasionally take a jaunt in there, right? I've been building this using other situations from the Gospels, but let's look at Acts 2. Verse 45. I want to focus in on this. Let's read it in context, verse 44. Start there. Now all who believed were what? Together. And had all things in what? And sold their possessions and goods and divided them among as anyone had. So we always look at that and we focus in on the goods, right? They took things that were physical, tangible possessions. They sold it. They divided it amongst each other. But can I say to you that there's another aspect of this that falls into time that's probably a lot more applicable in our current day. If I said, now all who believed were together, they held their time in common, and they gave their time and divided it among each other as people had need. If I said it that way, if we started looking at church that way, what is the possession that I have? I do possess my time, and I'm not suggesting that everybody here sell their house, throw it in the middle, and divide it. That may not necessarily meet the needs that we have. But what happens if this church takes its time and pulls it and says, who needs? Who wants? Who has a vacancy, an open place that needs to be filled? As I discover needs, I need to also be willing to drop what I'm doing to meet that need, to put a brother or sister above myself. The New Testament says we're supposed to prefer each other as greater than ourselves. So if I say Tammy is greater than me in my mind, what do I do for Tammy at that point? If I say Deb is greater than me, so what do I do for Deb? If I regard him as being more valuable than even myself, what happens if everybody in this room looks at the next person as more valuable than themselves? Well, then in somebody's eyes, you're always the favorite, right? You're always the favored one. There's a beauty to that because it means you're not left out of that equation. It means they are looking to you, you are looking to them, and there's something absolutely splendid that can happen in preferring one another. I'm going to read another scripture. Today we're going to be jumping around a little bit, but let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. It's a beautiful chapter. It's a chapter where it initially describes what love, which is actually more, it's better rendered charity, because it's love in action. It's not just an emotion that's being described here. It's a responsibility, it's a choice that's being described, and it's the choice of love. I wish we actually looked at it more like that. I think more marriages would be successful if people looked at it as the choice and the responsibility of love, not just the emotion, because emotions are fleeting. My emotions can change day by day, okay? If anybody has ever been in a marriage or has ever had interactions with an adult child or any of those kinds of things, you know that there are moments where your patience is tried and you're like, I love you, but right now I don't really like you, okay? And we do that in the church. Sure we do. We're human beings. I'm sure there's been moments where you're like, love you, Josie, don't like you right now. You're not my favorite at this moment. Sorry, I know. But the thing is that love, if we look at it only as an emotion, is something that's very fleeting. You can fall in and out of love if it's strictly based on the feeling that you have, because your feelings are based on certain factors of experiences. So if you're walking hand in hand through the park and you're enjoying a little gelato, oh, I just love you so much, right? Okay, cool, awesome, then have your first fight. Find out what you don't agree about, because you agree on gelato in the park, all right? But let's talk politics, all right? Let's see. Let's talk religion. Let's talk finance. And let's see, do you still match? And when you don't match, all of a sudden there's like, oh, hold on. I'm taking a step away because I don't really like that. Well, that love was not really a decision. That was not a responsibility. That was not a choice that you made. That was something that was based on emotional inspiration. When we're talking about biblical love, we're talking about a responsibility and a choice that's going to be backed up by action regardless of emotion. We're talking about a commitment that says, I know this isn't always going to work perfectly, and I know there are going to be some things that come up, but I still choose to love you. And because I have chosen to love you and make you mine, my brother, my sister, my fellow laborer in Christ, my if you will, fellow soldier that I'm fighting with and fighting for and standing next to, and you know what, you lose your shield, well, I guess half my body is all that's going to be guarded, but and the other half is yours, and we'll take our chances. You know, there's a difference in that level of love commitment. And so when we get into 1 Corinthians, we see this in verse 5, when it's describing the kind of love we are supposed to have one for another. It says, it is not a love that behaves rudely, it doesn't seek its own, it's not provoked, and it thinks no evil. Biblical love means that I have to look at you, even when there are moments that we are just not water finding the same level at all. I have to still look at you and say, I will not be provoked by that. I will not turn my back on you and just seek for myself because I've determined that you are not worth it. I'm not going to be annoyed and rude and leave you abandoned by yourself because you're not making me happy today. Because my love is not based on my happiness. My love is based on my pledge. I pledge to be yours. Jesus describes himself as the head, us as the body, but he also describes himself as the husband and us as the bride. He's trying to already show us that that marital relationship is a perfect demonstration of how this thing works. There's a vow. There's a covenant. There's an unbreakable bond. It should be unbreakable at the very least. And while people out there may use literal marriage as something that's easily torn apart and moved on from, not in the church. This is supposed to be the ideal. This is supposed to be the shining example of how it should work. That I am always going to be yours. And you may walk out of the church. You may. I may walk out of the church. God forbid, but I may. We don't know. We don't know what stupid things we have planned for ourselves in the future, right? Okay. But let's be honest. When I've committed, if, God forbid, Brother John is gone next week, he has completely gone off of the edge of himself, and he's out there, and, the nearest bar is where he has taken up. Oh my. Look at his. I have to say something outlandish, because then nobody will believe that it's possible, right? You heard that. So, yeah, you heard that one. But, if that's where Brother John is, then you know what should be happening? My heart should be aching. Because somebody I love, that's a part of me, that I'm committed to, that I'm vowed to, is not here. I need to take time and find him. If he doesn't want to be found, I do what I can, and then I pray. And you know what else I do? I wait. Like the prodigal son's father, I wait. And I make sure that when he comes back, that he is loved and he is welcomed, and I embrace him because he's always been mine, and nothing that he did ever changed that he was mine. Do you know what I'm saying? This is what the church has to do for each other, because this is how the backslider comes back. And this is how the broken come in, because they immediately feel, I belong. Like somebody cares that I exist. Let me build this a little bit more, because here's the thing. Let's reflect for a moment, because this is important. Am I investing enough time in my people? Now, you choose who your people are. I would say choose with generosity who your people are. Take as many people as you can. Take them in this church. Take them at your work. Take them in your family. Take them among your friends. Take them among old schoolmates. I don't care who you take them from. Take some people and make them yours. Make them something that you value. Make them something that you're committing to. Am I investing enough time in people? Because people are actually the only thing that survives beyond the grave. You believe in the eternal nature of the soul, right? You believe that our souls continue on, right? So then people are the only thing you take with you. People. I'm not going to take products. I'm not going to take belongings. I'm not going to take any of those things. I'm going to take my salvation. Remember how we started this. Paul said, take heed of your life, because you can save people with it. And the choices that you make and the way that you live your life has an effect and can actually bring them with you. Now we're really going to nail it home, because we're going to go into a parable of Jesus, and I think we're going to turn it on its head. Go to Luke chapter 16. This is the last thing we're going to focus on as we sort of build this. Luke chapter 16. First 13 verses, I'm going to go ahead and read it. This is going to seem so odd. I promise you it's going to seem odd. But if you stick with me a minute, it'll make some sense. Luke chapter 16, he also said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward. An accusation was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account for your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, what shall I do? My master is taking the stewardship away from me. I can't dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I have resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him and said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said, take your bills, sit down quickly, write 50. Then he said to another, how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said, take your bill, write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And I say to you, this is so odd. Make friends for yourself by, you can read that as with, unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. At first glance, it feels like perhaps Jesus is kind of commending a steward who's like doing some shady stuff. He's in a scramble. I mean, let's just be honest. This guy's been told he's going to get fired, give an account for what you're doing. So he goes out and he's like, I'm going to find everybody that owes him a debt since I haven't done well, and I'm going to make some deals for them. And it seems like Jesus is actually patting this dude on the back and saying, what you did, awesome. And we have to ask ourselves, why? What is awesome about this? Because, again, this feels like manipulation. This feels like a guy who's just scrambling to keep his job. This is a guy who's working all these kinds of backdoor deals in order to be able to save face. And I got news for you, that's exactly what's happening. And that's exactly what Jesus is commending in this moment. He sure is. In fact, he's saying the people of the world are able to do that. What's up with you guys? They deal in shrewd ways, and they know how to make things happen, but it seems like you don't. So let me just tell you, he literally says it, start making friends using that money in your pocket so that when you fail, there's somebody who's going to receive you. Whoa, Jesus, what are you talking about? I'm going to tell you what he's talking about. There are three ways that you're going to find people. You are going to find people in three different phases in their lives. And in this room, there are people in all three phases right now because this is kind of a cycle that always goes. Phase number 1, highs. Phase number 2, lows. Phase number 3, transitions. Highs, lows, transitions. We are always in a cycle of highs, lows, and transitions. And we underestimate how important it is to invest relationally in people when they are in these phases by showing up in their lives. Romans 12:15 says this. It says, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Well, if you're not around a person, you don't know what phase they're in. You don't know if they're rejoicing. You don't know if they're weeping if you are not close enough to understand. The one thing about this steward we can say is he knew who the debtors were and he knew the trouble they were in. The deals that he worked were very convenient for them and convenient for him. It allowed him to save face and it allowed them to get out of debt. Jesus is commending the fact that he had enough foresight to save his skin by saving someone else's. We're going somewhere with this. What are the highs? Well, the highs are being a part of a community enough that you're committed to be there in the moments that people are celebrating. There are some people in this room who are probably experiencing some highs. Some things have happened in your life that are good. Maybe it's a birthday. Maybe it's a graduation. Maybe you recently went to your daughter's graduation. It was important that you be there. She needed to know. She needed to know that mom recognized the work that she put in to that moment. Now, can you imagine if the graduation of her daughter was met with a room of smiling faces, none for her? Can you imagine what it means? Let me tell you something. When you know that your brothers or sisters are rejoicing about something, find a way to rejoice with them. Find a way to be present with them. Don't miss their big moments, because I got to tell you something. A big moment is awesome, but a big moment is spectacular when it's shared, when somebody else thinks it's equally awesome. So when those plays are happening for kids, be there. Whatever it is. Whatever that moment is, if you know it's somebody's birthday, please do me a favor. I don't care if you even do it just on Facebook. Send them a text message. Do something. Be aware of each other enough to say, I am happy for you. I'm so happy for you. In fact, I will remember that this is your special day, whatever it may be. When they buy that house, cheer them on and get them a gift. Doesn't have to be big. Doesn't have to be crazy. Give them something from your home. This is whatever. You know, I don't care, a family heirloom. I don't care what it is. Do something. Bake them a cake and wish them well. Do something. Because as a church, we have to be present for those highs. Those highs mean something. Those lows also mean something. Weeping with those that weep. People are going to remember how you made them feel in times when they had the capacity to feel quite alone. I'm talking about sorrow. I'm talking about fatigue. I'm talking about loss. It's about helping people to feel like your presence alone makes a difference. Ben Mandrell he's a former pastor, and he's a prolific Christian writer. And he tells this story that he had a son who had these chronic ear infections. This kid, the ear infections were so bad, they were in the hospital at least 3 times a month in the ER, the kid's ears bleeding, everything. It was chronic. Nobody could get to the bottom of why this little kid was going through this. And he would send, the prayer requests in the hospital again. to his church. They had kind of like what we have, a way to communicate prayer requests. And one particular day, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and his son woke up screaming. The ear was on fire again. And here's Ben Mandrell, who has a full-time job, and he has to get himself up and get over to the emergency room, and he shoots a prayer request out. Everybody's gotten used to these. And there's a man from the church who shows up in his PJ bottoms at 3 o'clock in the morning and sits in the ER. He doesn't say anything, he just brings his pastor a cup of coffee. And he just sits with him. Ben Mandrell says that moment literally revolutionized him, because that person had no obligation except that he loved his pastor and felt badly that his pastor's been going through this. So he just showed up at the hospital and sat there, and he didn't make his pastor have to flip the switch to be on and social. He didn't say hardly anything. He just brought him a cup of coffee and sat right next to him so that if he wanted to talk, there was somebody who would listen. He ended up losing that saint during COVID. And the gentleman passed away. His name was Edward. And he said, when Edward went on to his reward, he said, I realized I had lost someone who loved me. Can I just say that I know there are people in this room that are experiencing lows? Check on your people. All right, if they say they need a little bit of space, give them what they need. But check on your people. Really listen. Pray for discernment. Pray that you can see through whatever the mask might be in that moment to see the real need and meet the need. And maybe that need is just, I see you and I know that you're carrying right now. I want you to know I love you and I'm here in whatever capacity you need. And then give them some tangibles. Well, is there something that I could do for you? You know, would it ease you if I took care of this for a little while? Or would it ease you if I, gave your family some food? Or would it ease, what would ease you? And if they say, I'm not quite sure yet, that's okay, don't push. But you showed them, you see them. You showed them it matters. We got to be with people in their lows. And then transitions. Transitions are an interesting thing. There was a chaplain that said it this way, that once they got into chaplaincy ministry and realized transitions, that's when you're moving from one place to another and things, you're letting go of something and moving to another thing, and a relationship ends. A child moves out of the home and now you're an empty nester. You've taken on a new ministry, which meant you had to let go of a previous ministry. Whatever those things are, transitions, it's when you're moving from one state to another, whatever that state may be. Let me tell you something, having been a chaplain myself, in the stages of grief, the number one stage of grief for people is not death. It's losing a job. If you can believe it, it's the number one cause of grief. It's the loss of a job. Because that throws everything into turmoil. Finances, everything is touched by that, right? So retirement is actually a very big grief for a lot of people. What's my purpose now? What am I supposed to do with my time? And so understand that when people are in transition, it's huge. And there was this chaplain who said, one of the biggest things I learned is how to give space, time, and care when people are saying goodbye. Because there are people in this room who are probably saying goodbye or have recently said goodbye to something in their lives that's changed. Maybe your health has changed. Maybe your energy level has changed. Maybe your relationship structure, your family structure has changed. Whatever that is, something's changed, and now you're dealing with that, and that's jarring. We have to be there for people in their transitions. We have to be present in their goodbyes. They have to know, even if they're goodbye, because eventually, right? Listen, as a church, we know that our Rexburg work is going to continue to gain legs. You know, we're going to have to say goodbye to them at some point, right? And it's going to collectively break everybody's hearts, right? But does it have to be permanent goodbye? No. And if it is, we did something really wrong. To be present in somebody's goodbye is to say, I can still be the thing that's steady, even though some things have changed. I can still be present for you. Okay, it might take a little more work. It might take a little more planning, but I'm here. And it doesn't have to be permanent. It's hard for us to deal with permanent things, isn't it? Permanence is hard. The church should be the permanent thing. Our brethren have to be the permanent thing. If we're present for people in their highs, in their lows, in their transitions, then I think we'll understand what Jesus is saying at the end of that parable a little bit better. He's saying to modernize it, when you use your time, when you use your money, when you use your talent to build relationships, real relationships, so that people feel relief because you stepped into the equation, there are going to be people in heaven to receive you because you invested in them personally. Remember the first scripture, guard your life. Guard your life. Pay attention to how you're spending it because you will save people. The steward was a fool in the beginning, but he figured it out in the end. If I can just make this good for them, it might turn out okay for me. As a church, let's make it good for each other.